Shout my hip hop since 1987, niggas. Hip hop since 1987.com.
There's somewhat of a gap with us talking in between the IT Just Blaze and the producer Just Blaze as a child. When did you make your first beat and what did you use? You're using all kind of gadgets to make beats. What did you use?
I mean, it would probably have been one of my father's Casio keyboards that were like, had pre-programmed rhythms that you could put your own music over and back them up to cassette. You know, there were always musical gadgets around me, but I wouldn't say the first time in the traditional hip-hop sense. Casio made a keyboard which was basically the first commercially available sampler. It was called the SK1. And it had maybe like 3 or 4 seconds of sampling time. And this kid that I used to skateboard with down in Virginia, when I used to stay there in the summers, either he had one or his brother had one. And that was like my first time like putting a song in something and making it loop over and over. And then it just so happened, my best friend growing up, a couple years later, his sister got the updated version, which was the Casio SK5. And that had like 4 drum pads, and it had like 6 seconds sampling time. You could actually assign samples to the pads. And around that same time, you know, as a kid, I wasn't supposed to go to the basement, and I wasn't supposed to go to the attic. The basement was more so just because that's where they hid the Christmas presents. So we weren't allowed to go down there. And then the attic was just full of stuff, and you just didn't go up there. But I went to the attic one day anyway, and I found a bunch of my mother's old records, both my mother and my father's old records, and I'm playing them, and I'm realizing that like, this James Brown record is the same thing that Public Enemy is rapping on right now. This Isaac Hayes thing is the same thing that, you know, Tribe is rapping on right now. And that was when I first realized that these records that I was listening to at that time were coming from other records. And Casio puts out this thing called the SK5. And so I started, you know, when you're young like that and impressionable, you always start out trying to mimic the people you look up to. You know, so I'm like kind of remaking Public Enemy beats or Jazzy Jeff beats or, you know, Large Professor beats or whoever it was that I was listening to at that time, because I realized that I kind of had the same foundation. Like I had, like, it blew my mind when I realized that Rebel Without a Pause by Public Enemy were the funky drummer drums by James Brown at the end. Like, I flipped my mother's 45 over, got to the end, and I'm like, and I'm like, that's Chuck D and Flavor Flav. You know, so the first thing I did was get that Casio and figure out a way to get those sounds in there. And, you know, at that age, I was probably like 12 at the time, whatever. You know, you had friends, other friends who look up to rappers and want to be rappers. So we're basically in my house making our first demos, you know, at like 11, 12 years old. With the most, you know, rudimentary tools possible, but that was really the foundation for everything. And eventually I convinced my mother to buy me or somebody was my mother, somebody else in my family, I convinced them to give me money to buy a 4-track cassette recorder. And that kind of began the road down learning how to engineer. Because now I'm not just trying to make a beat, I'm trying to figure out how to record vocals and how to get my music to sound the same way it would on the radio. Because I'm thinking, I have the same thing that they have. You know, like not knowing that these guys have $1 million studios. Yeah, engineers and whatnot. So, you know, I'm just like sitting there all day, like I don't know anything about compression, about dynamics. I'm just sitting there twisting the EQ knob all day, like trying to figure out how to get that snare to sound the way that it does on that Tribe Called Quest record. And what's I gonna say? What also kind of validated it for me was, now we call them EPKs, electronic press kits. I don't know what the term for them was back then, but we had a local video show called Video Music Box, which was the first was the first place that a lot of rap videos were ever played.
The box.
One of the things that Ralph McDaniels used to play on this, he would play EPKs on this show. And there was a De La Soul one where they were talking about the making of 3 Feet High and Rising. And at one point they're in Prince Paul's crib and he has, a set of 1200s in a mixer, but then he has that Casio SK5 at the top. So I'm thinking, all right, yeah, I got what he got. I can make Prince Paul beats. Not knowing that was probably just something for him to reference ideas or whatever, but it was, when you're that young, you're thinking you have the same tools, it motivates you to do things as good as they were doing. And, but then again, I'm from Patterson, New Jersey, relatively small city. I'm not from New York, I'm not from LA, I'm not from, anywhere where rappers or producers are successful. So it's still kind of all a pipe dream that you don't really think will ever actually happen. And I guess the gap that you're referring to is when things really started to change for me was when as soon as I got to college, I went to Rutgers. Some in New Brunswick, some in Newark. And when I got to Rutgers, Newark was right around the time that you had groups like The Artifacts, Redman, Funny by Nature, Lords of the Underground, Flavor Unit, Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah had been out for a while, but this was my first time being on that side of the stage. And through some, people that I had met while I was in school, getting the opportunity to DJ at open mics. But because that rap community in terms of Newark and Essex County in general is relatively small, and everybody knows everybody, the Artifacts might show up to an open mic. Or Redman might show up to an open mic. Or one of the Outsiders might show up to an open mic. And I'm playing my beats at these open mics for people to rap to. And once I see Redman walk in, I'm like, oh, I can't play my beats. I have to play the new hot whatever beat. But he would get on stage and be like, no, put that other beat that you were just playing back on. And I'm like, you want to rap on my beat? All right, let's go. Boom. So things like that, and meeting a lot of people who at the time before I met them were like superheroes. A lot of times when you're at a young age and you're watching MTV or Video Music Box or The Box or BET or anything like that, when you're at that young impressionable age, these guys are superheroes. They don't really exist.
Untouchable.
Yeah, no, it's not even they're untouchable. They don't exist. It's something you watch on TV. And it's like make believe. You buy their records, but they're not really people. And then all of a sudden you're meeting them. And I know because we have the internet now, that perception doesn't exist as much anymore. If there's somebody who's a fan of me, they can find me on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. There was no way to find Redman in 1991. You just didn't find him. You didn't just look up you didn't Google him. There was no Google, there was none of that. So I'm in this environment where all of a sudden these superheroes are becoming real live people. And not that any of them were I didn't befriend a lot of them, but I got to meet a lot of them, and it just became more human and more tangible. And I realized that maybe this is something I actually can do because these guys are actually really people. It humanized them. And I think that was the biggest inspiration for me to eventually leave school in my senior year and just say I can do this. I got a chance at an internship at a studio in Manhattan called The Cutting Room, and it was only supposed to last for a week. Long story short, I was on my winter break for my senior year, and got a chance to intern at a studio only because one of their other interns had gotten sick with a stomach flu, so I was going to be out for a week. So I got, through a childhood friend of mine who also became my manager and business partner years later. They were like, do you want to intern? And I'm like, I would love to. So I did it for a week, and that following Monday, which was supposed to be my last day, the intern called the studio like, yeah, I just got a record deal with EMI. I'm not coming back. Click. So they looked at me like, you want to stay? Within a few months, parlayed that into an actual job. And, I could sit down and explain to my mother, hey, listen, most people go to college, and if they want to pursue a career, they start out as an intern and work their way up. I have that opportunity to do that right now. I need to leave school. And the reason that conversation was so hard to have with her was because she's a high school principal. So education is her life. So I turn around and tell her, like, hey, yeah, that thing that you dedicated the last 30 years of your life to, I'm out. You know? But she was like, well, will this make you happy? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, you sure? I'm like, yeah. She said, all right, as long as you're happy, healthy, and respectful of others, and they respect you, and whatever field it is you're going into, go for it. And I never looked back. And from there, I got to watch a lot of classic records being made. I got to watch a lot of historic and great producers, you know, working their craft, and just kind of absorb that knowledge in as an intern. And that led to all this.
Fast forward a little bit, your first major placement after you drop out, you do the internship, you get your first major placement on the Harlem World album. Yeah. I really like it.
Yeah.
How'd that come together?
Well, when I was an intern and once I actually landed a job at the studio, you know, I basically didn't sleep. My day job had me there from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then I was practicing being Just Blaze from 7 p.m. until 8 a.m. Go take a shower and come back and do the same thing. And one of the things that I used to do was, I'm not a good salesman, I'm not a good talker. So what I would do was just kind of keep the door cracked when people of note were in the studio, like in the room that I was working in, so that they could like walk past and maybe one day be like, oh, what's that? Oh, what's that? And it never happened. But through that process, I befriended, you know, or became acquaintances with some of the guys I'm friends with now. But, you know, met some A&Rs and people, and we were just cool. And then one day I'm doing my usual leaving the door crack, and I didn't even know that Mace's managers were in the next room. And one of them was going to the bathroom and walked past. It was like, you know, peeked his head through the door. He's like, what's this? And I'm like, oh, just something I'm working on. So we get to talking. Ended up getting pretty friendly. This was his manager's assistant. And he went and got his manager, brought him in the room, and I played him some beats. And he was like, yo, we should talk. Yeah. So, because Mace's manager was the same guy who discovered Nelly. So he's like, yo, I just signed this group called the St. Lunatics. I'm gonna grab this one kid named Nelly out of that group and make him a solo. You know, he's got this dude, whose name was J.E., I think his name was. That's gonna be doing a lot of the production. Maybe you could do half the album, he does the other half. Maybe, you know, like, he was basically trying to pitch me to sign me. Yeah. Which gave me a deer in the headlights moment, because, you know, you hear those horror stories, you're like, you want me to sign? No. You know, like, I didn't want to sign to anybody, because you hear those horror stories, and I would see contracts, because I was intern at the studio, I would see contracts that would come in on the fax machine, and be like, yeah, production company's getting $70,000, the producer's getting $10,000, and I'm like, you know, I was still a kid, I'm like not even 20 yet, so you hear those horror stories, you don't have lawyers, you don't have managers, you're just like, what? Anyway, so his manager's assistant sticks around after the session's over, we start talking about ideas, and he's like, yo, you should flip New Edition Popcorn Love and give that to Mace. And I'm like, because at the time that was the big thing. Puff was doing all the 80s records. Yeah. I wasn't really about that, but I was like, all right, well, if you think that'll work, yeah, that'll work, I'll do it. So I did it. They had a session the next day. Mace's manager comes back in and he's like, yo, come to the Hit Factory on Thursday. Hit Factory was a studio in New York, no longer exists. He's like, yo, come to the Hit Factory on Thursday. I went to the Hit Factory on Thursday, played it, and Mace starts jumping around the room like, this is my single. And I'm like, wow, they were right. You know, and the shiny suit era of hip-hop wasn't really my thing, but it was one of those things, it was a calculated move. Like, I know if I do this, I can get in the door, you know. Still kept my day job. I didn't like, you know, they gave me a check for 10 grand. I didn't do the, yo, I'm rich, bitch, I'm out. I kept my day job, and actually watched the premiere of the video with everybody from the day job. You know, like sat on the couch like, yo, my video's coming up. And watched it, and it got to a point where from that thing snowballed. And then eventually my boss sat me down and was like, why are you still working here? And I'm like, well, because I have rent to pay. You know, and my thing was, I know that at the end of the day, that $400 a week or whatever was $400 or $500 a week that I get from you every week, pays that rent. You know, and he's like, yeah, but you working here is messing up your production career, and your production career is messing up your work here. So you need to figure out what you want to do. And you know, he kept it 100% real. He's like, you trying to play both sides of the fence for security is hurting everything. You know, like, I can't rely on you to do certain things, and I know for a fact that you're struggling to really pursue your production career because you're worried about invoices and whether or not there's paper cups in the kitchen. And I'm like, all right, I'm out. That was that.
Now, I want to get a little deeper into your production process. I want to play a few records for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
And if you guys don't mind.
Why not?
Exactly. I want to start with some of my favorite. Now, this is a little older track.
Prophecy read that one day, like the phoenix arose from the ashes, that a boy would be born unto a family in the slums. This boy would go on to use the knowledge he gained while fighting for survival in these streets to become a great leader. And in time, that boy would grow to become king.
With the youngest in charge, respected from east to west like he was running the mall. Dictate, they taking orders from no one but God. I know you niggas is broke cause I know what you charge. You niggas wishing for a fountain, this one in my garage. Black as Ligari, right next to a platinum Ferrari. You niggas ain't getting money out, rapping up solid. Fucking rent, I'm way to spend 60 large on a large.
Okay, I want to play another record.
I forgot about that.
That's my joint right there, man.
I always hated the intro to that.
Something a little newer.
Now everybody serenade the new faith of Kendrick Lamar. This is King Kendrick Lamar. King Kendrick, and I meant it, my point intended is raw. Fiction lenses, forensics would have told you Kendrick had killed it, pretended some massacre. And the masses upon us, and I mastered being the master at dodging your honor. In the chapter that read at 25, I will live dormant like 5 in the morning. The rage spot while Kendrick performing, and if they take everything, know I got Compton, ain't no CT quite like mine. Hey Dre, what's happening with it, my nigga? Still.
Now, I play those two records to ask you this. And in the extent of your career, you've used, like you said, several different types of hardware, a few different types of software. In the beginning, you were big with the MPC. A little later, Logic Studios. What are you using now? And also, walk us through the process of a young Just Blaze starting and finishing a beat, pause, and a much more skilled and polished Just Blaze starting and finishing a beat.
Well, see, I mean, I think for me, where the focus has changed, probably, you know, since, I don't know, around 2001 or 2, before I was just focused on making a beat. Eventually I realized being a producer is not about making a beat, it's about delivering a song. So, whereas before I just wanted to show people that I can make crazy beats and be one of the best at doing that, eventually it was like, well, making a beat is cool. Creating songs is what a producer's job actually is. So, whereas before I used to make a beat and then just play it for Jay or whoever and hope somebody wanted to rap on it, the focus became more about what is the vision, where does this song sit on the album, where does this song what part in an artist's live show does this get performed at? If it gets performed at a live show, is it the encore song, is it the intro song, is it the song to bring the mood down and make things dark? Like, I started thinking about things from that aspect. In terms of the actual technical process, there really is never a starting point. You know, I may hear something that inspires me, whether it be a sample, a car horn. Like there's this, my studio is right next to a train station, and they have this crazy alarm that I want to use so bad on a record. And I keep meaning to go get a field recorder and go out to the train station and just sit there and record it. But inspiration can come from so many different areas, so many different avenues. You never know where it's gonna come from. It can come from hearing a drum loop and you base everything around the drums. It can come from hearing a sample and you map everything around that sample. If I do find a sample that I like, and I'm starting with that, a lot of times, and I've said this in interviews before, a lot of time, by the time I even touch the gear or whatever I'm using, I've made half the beat in my head already. Yeah, I'm like the approach these days, because technology is different, is you'll take a record or you'll download a song, put it in whatever DAW you're using, and chop it up there. When I was sampling from records, what I would do is listen to the record and just find the individual chops I want to use and just sample those into the MP, have a bunch of chops, and then start to arrange them in my head while I'm truncating and arranging and whatnot. So I would say about 50 to 80% of the record, or the beat at least, will be done in my head already. But the process is never the same. It's different for every song, And I think a lot of that is because it depends on what's inspiring it. If you're inspired by, I've been inspired not just by music or things that I see, but situations in my life. You know what I mean? Like Live Your Life. Everybody thinks that Live Your Life is this big triumphant record about pushing forward and being successful and working through obstacles. That record was a giant FU to my ex-girlfriend. I was telling her, go live your life. You want to be a fancy star, drive your fancy car, go live your life. But by the time me and Tip collaborated on it, it became something completely different. But the inspiration behind that was basically me just being tired of dealing with her BS.
Living life in Facebook.
Yeah.
Women inspired, okay.
Shout my hip hop since 1987 niggas. Hip hop since 1987.com.